Hi, I'm Shannon from houseimprovements.com. In today's tool related video that we're going to do, I'm going to talk about circular saws. Kind of the basics. I've got two different types here, two different brands even, and there's a few different things about each one of these. Not only are they different brands, but first off, one is a corded saw and one is a battery operated saw. The battery operated cordless saws are getting way better than they used to be even 5 years ago. I personally hardly ever even use the corded saw anymore. I'm pretty much solely using this cordless saw every day. The battery technology has just gotten so much better, and saw motors and everything. It's just the way to go as far as I'm concerned. But I want to show you both styles anyways. So we've got corded, battery. The next most obvious thing you're going to notice is these saws have the blade on opposite sides of each other. Okay, so one is a left-handed, not left-handed, but left, I don't know what you call it, blade on the left side sort of saw. It's not really made, it's not necessarily left-hand or right-hand people. This one's the right-handed blade. Okay, typically this is what a lot of people see, is this right-handed saw, but more and more manufacturers now are making both. One thing I also prefer about this, not only does it not have a cord, but I prefer the blade on the left side because I suppose because I'm right-handed, I usually am using my right hand, right arm to operate the saw. So my tendency is to be on the left side of the saw. So I can easily see the blade, I can see any line I'm trying to follow or what I'm cutting. Where with this one, for me, when I'm trying to do that same thing, I have no real great clear vision to the blade. There's a little spot, if you get just right, you can see down through this guard. I don't even know if you can see on the camera through that hole. You can just see the blade in there. Most people just get used to it, or you're kind of cocking your neck around to this side to watch the blade. Once you've used the one that you like, where you can see the blade nice and clear, you never want to go back. It's just so much easier. The other thing I like about this is because you're sometimes using this lever on the side to lift the guard out of the way. It's just more natural for me to be doing this, where on this one I'm kind of reaching across my body to operate it. And again, now this arm's in the way for me to see what I'm doing. So those are the main differences between these two saws, and like I said, a lot of manufacturers will put the blade on either side. So you just need to purchase the one that's your preference. Some of the basic components on all these saws that you're going to find some kind of adjustment to be able to cut angles. Okay, so that you can cut whatever angle. It's going to be labeled here in degrees, and they're generally quite accurate. This one cuts all the way up to 50 degrees. So this one is on the front of the saw. This one is as well. I think typically a lot of them are. Okay, so this one's not quite as refined as that one, but it does the same thing. Okay, so you've got the angles there. The next important thing you've got is a way to adjust the depth of the blade from the base plate. So on this one, there's a little lever over here that loosens up this so you can set the depth of the blade. Now, you can take the battery out. So if you're cutting, let's say you're cutting 1.5 inch material, a 2x4, right? I would generally have my blade set at around 2 inches deep. Okay, you don't want too much of the blade sticking out through the material you're cutting. It's a bit of a hazard, and it's also a little harder on the blades. Okay, so you can adjust your depth. Another reason to adjust your depth is maybe you're using it to cut a dado. So you'll only be cutting part way through whatever material you have. Okay, and so that kind of looks after the depth part. This one the lever was over there. This one, the lever's kind of on the back side here. Oops, got to push it up. It's been so long since I used this saw, I forgot how it worked. So same idea, right? They're just kind of a clamping mechanism. Now, what's another thing? Most of the saws will have, well, they'll all, for one thing, have some indents, these little notches in the front, or some kind of mark, which is a guide, depending on your saw, where the blade is running. Once you get to know your saw, you'll know you know, if you got to have your line that you're following on the left side or the right side or right down the middle, but you're going to have some kind of guide out here right on the front of the shoe to be putting your line on that you're following or you're cutting along. And there's one for when you've got the saw at 90 degrees, just like this. And there's a different area when you've got the saw tilted over to 45. Just about all of them have that. Now, the other thing, and we already talked about this a little bit, is you're going to have this little arm right here, which will help you lift up the guard if you needed to. If you were going to do a plunge cut into the middle of this piece of plywood, you could lift this up, start the saw spinning, and slowly lower it into the plywood, right? If you've got that guard down, it doesn't allow you to do that, okay? So there's some applications where you need to be able to get that guard out of the way. Sometimes when you're cutting a little sliver off of something, it gets bound up in the guard. You kind of need the guard up out of the way to get started on it, that sort of thing, okay? So they're all going to have a guard as well, and it's a spring loaded. If you notice when I'm doing that, it's spring loaded. It's meant to, once you get through the piece of wood, right, this is going to, normally when you're cutting as you're going through, it's going to drag back here, drag back, and then when you get out of the wood that you're cutting, it's going to return to the closed position. So when you set it down, the blade isn't exposed, or you aren't, you know, cutting somebody else, okay? So that's one thing to watch. Sometimes those springs go and this doesn't return on its own, and that's probably one of the most dangerous things about these saws, so you should always get that repaired. We've got that. The other thing I've got on both saws, a lot of times they'll come with a guide, or you can purchase a guide. And what this is, there'll be a spot on the saw. Both of these, yeah, these are both on the front. I think they're usually always on the front. You've got a spot where you can slide this guide in, a little adjustment to tighten it. So if you wanted to, maybe you've got some plywood and you want to rip a bunch of 3-inch strips. Put that guide in there. You measure from the guide over to your blade, whatever measurement you're looking for, tighten that little knob. Now you could rip a whole bunch of strips by running this guide along the straight edge of whatever material you're on. You're just running right through, and just do multiple cuts all that way. I use that guide actually quite a bit, and it'll fit in either way, depending on your needs. It'll fit in either way. They're not all usable on all different saws. A lot of times each saw manufacturer kind of has their own design or size of this, so you kind of usually have to buy it to match your saw. Okay, so you've got that guide, and pretty well all of them will have it. For circular saws, you can go, for these types of styles, you can go anywhere from a $40 saw to $600 likely. So there's quite a variable in there depending on the brand, the options, quality of the saw, okay? It's a very versatile tool though. One of the first tools you should get if you're going to be cutting or building anything would be a circular saw, because there's a lot of things you can do with it. This one here, another nice feature it has is it's got this little hook. So if you're up on a roof or something like that and you're having to use this saw, this little hook is so that you can hang it on a rafter or hang it on a piece of 2x4 or whatever, so it doesn't slide down the roof on you. So I like that feature, and when you don't need it, it just folds out of the way. They're all going to have a rear handle. These Sidewinder saws like this are all going to have a rear handle and a front handle. And I believe if you actually read the instruction books, they tell you should have 2 hands on the saw. And in the beginning you probably will until you get really comfortable with your saw, and then you're going to get used to probably using 1 hand, but they recommend both hands on the saw. All the saws will have a blade that's removable. Your blade size will be different. Like this saw here is a 6.5-inch blade. This saw here should be a 7.25 inch. Most of the bigger electric saws like this will be 7.25. A lot of the cordless ones will be, 6.5. They're starting to get to the point where there are some 7.25s though as well. When you want to change the blade, that depends on the saws again, as far as what you need to do to change it. With this particular saw, it has an onboard storage for the wrench, and it has a little button right here. right down there. And what happens with that button, now I've got the battery out, right? Or if it was corded, I'd have it unplugged. With that button, you want to put some pressure on it and just turn your blade until this button goes in. It's a shaft lock. Where is it? I've got to find it. There it is. Now my button went in and it locks this shaft so it can't turn. And it allows me to use this wrench to undo the bolt that's holding it on. It's kind of awkward to show you here. But I'm going to actually change this one. Okay, so there it's locked in. And these are always backwards to the way, you know, righty-tighty, loosey-goosey, whatever, lefty-loosey. This nut's going to be opposite of what you're always used to. Okay, so I want to take this off. I'm actually going to turn it, oops. I'm actually going to turn it the way that you think would actually tighten it. Okay, so I loosened that off. I can take this nut right out. Okay, don't lose the nut. There's a little arbor plate that goes on there. That comes off, and then the blade will lift out and slide off the shaft. Okay, so you can put another blade on. The direction of your teeth, when you look at the side of the blade, when it's in the saw, this being the front of the saw. Actually, let's show you right on this one. So you can see the front of the saw. You see the angle of the teeth. This blade on circular saws is always turning this direction. It's always spinning this way and up through what you're cutting. So you want the teeth going forward. You don't want the teeth, here's another similar blade. So you don't want the teeth going back in that direction, right? Because the blade's turning this way. The teeth wouldn't, well, they would cut, but they wouldn't be doing a very good job. Okay? So you'd obviously get your new blade or different tooth blade or whatever you're doing on the reason you're changing the blade. You put everything back in the reverse order. Oops. I was kind of holding it up flat here because I'm trying to get it to stay all sitting down where it's supposed to. Okay, so just finger tighten the nut. Then you need to turn it again to get the spindle lock in place. Come on. I look like I've never changed a saw blade before. I think the arbor just wasn't quite on there because I was trying to show you what I was doing and it was falling out of position. Okay, so get your arbor lock into position. Remember that that's reversed. And you don't need to put a snipe on there and get it so tight that you never get it off again. It'll naturally, the reason it's in a reverse thread is it'll naturally kind of tighten itself up a little bit extra too so that it doesn't come off. Some people, if your saw doesn't have an arbor lock, they will just simply jam the blade into a piece of wood to basically kind of hold it into place. Okay, so that's that one. This one here still has the arbor lock, a little different switch, but it's right down in the front again. Same idea, make sure your saw is unplugged, turn this till it positively locks in. This one's got a wrench, but it's the same idea, it just fits on here. Some of them will have something on the cord to keep the wrench. This one doesn't, it just stays in the box. But okay, so you've got your wrench. This one's got the onboard Allen wrench. Just about most of the newer saws now will have a safety lock on them so that you can't actually pull the trigger until you first pulled the safety, which is this here. So you need to pull the safety before the trigger will engage. This one doesn't have that. This one simply you can, as soon as you touch that trigger, it's going. So I'm going to put the battery in here and you can see I can't, without touching this, without depressing this safety, I can't actually engage the saw. But as soon as I do that, it will engage. I think that's got most of the basic things out of the way here. Now, as far as safety, of course, you are going to want to have safety glasses on. You want to keep your fingers back from any of this stuff. Always keep the guard in good shape. Yeah, that's kind of the main safety things. When you're using a corded saw, make sure the cord isn't hanging down in a position where you're going to cut it with the blade. That'd be really bad. Depending on your saw or the conditions you're in, you may want hearing protection. You may want a dust mask, depending on what you're cutting. Just some of the basic things like that you want to consider as making sure you have those accessories with you. Most circular saws, you can put all kinds of different blades in. You've got blades that have more teeth than others. This here is probably, I don't know, a 24 tooth or maybe a 30, and this is a 20. So depending what you're cutting, it might help you to have a different blade. So the more teeth, generally speaking, the more teeth you have, the cleaner, finer cut you're gonna have. So if you're just framing or something, an 18 or 20 tooth blade is more than enough. If you're cutting some decent plywood, then you might want to have a few more teeth. And also, depending what you're doing, you might want to be cutting on the back side, because as I explained, the way the saw blade turns in a circular saw, it's cutting up through the top of the surface as you cut, and generally leaving some splinters there, but a much cleaner cut in the bottom. Now you could also buy a disc like this if you're going to be cutting some metal, or this one's actually for masonry, but similar discs would cut metal. There's some that are diamond, they've got a diamond rim around them for cutting tiles or cement, again, concrete. So there's different blades you can buy depending on what you're cutting, but most people are going to be cutting wood, so you're going to have a normal wood blade in there. I think that pretty well does what I wanted to show you. I don't know, do I want to show making a cut with a circular saw? I guess that would be kind of the next natural thing. So I'll do a couple different things. First I'll get on some safety glasses. I'll get some of this stuff out of the way. And I'll use the cordless saw just because this is the one I use the most and I'm most comfortable with. So basic cut with a circular saw, a lot of times you're going to be framing, you're going to want to cut something, so you've got your line marked or position marked. And like I said, you're lining your blade up with the position you want to cut. This one also has a light on it, I should have mentioned. Some do, some don't. So when I depress the safety, the light comes on. It makes it easier to see what you're doing. So I'm holding the wood that I'm using firmly. I'm holding the saw firmly and I'm making my cut. So you want to start the saw up before it's in contact with the wood, let it get up to speed, and then continue your cut. And just let the saw do the cutting. Don't force your way. You don't have to put a lot of weight on it. Just cut it as fast as the saw wants it to go. Okay, just like that. So that's a basic, cutting a 2x4. If you wanted to use this guide, and we want to cut whatever a 1-inch strip, let's say, of material off that piece of plywood. Let's make it 1.5 inches just to make it a little simpler to do. So we set that guide. We get our plywood. I know this edge is straight here. I'm going to just clamp this plywood to the table. Now my plywood's hanging off the table, so I don't cut the table, obviously. I can put my battery back in. And so my guide will start against here well before the blade is even close. So I usually get my guide against the edge of the wood. I'll start my saw up and then I'll make my cut. Now what didn't I do? I didn't adjust my depth of my blade. It's kind of hard for me to show you this with this clamp in there. How can I do this? Get this up off the table. Okay, so I'm going to loosen off my base, hold my guard back. You can see my blade down there. I'm just going to lower it down so I'm cutting, maybe a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch past the bottom of my material. Clamp this back on. Okay, so I've got my guide and I'll start again. Okay, so I've made a nice even strip here. I haven't had to sit there straining myself to follow a line that I snapped with a chalk line or just drew with a straight edge or something. Something else actually, this is a good one. If you've got, let's just say this is the top of 2 sawhorses. Okay, you've got your sawhorses, you've got your 2x4 sitting on those sawhorses. When I make a cut, I don't want to make that cut between these 2 support points. Because what's going to happen as I get most of the way through here, this wood's going to, because of the cut in it, it's going to get weak and it's going to want to start to kind of close on itself and move around, which binds on the blade. Now what that does is it pinches the blade and it will cause sometimes the saw to want to jump out of the wood, back out of the wood, which is dangerous because it's generally coming towards you or towards your hand or something like that. So when you're cutting something, you always want to be cutting outside of the support points. Now because I'm right-handed, most times this would be the way I'd prefer to do it. I want to be cutting out here, outside of these 2 support points, and I'm hanging onto this over here, or I have it clamped to the sawhorses or whatever. Okay, so that's very important. That's one of the places people do get hurt with these saws, is cutting a piece of material between 2 support points. Because, and I can probably show it better with this, between the support points, so just imagine the flex in that. As I start cutting through there and it gets weaker and weaker, this is just going to want to twist, close up the gap that was left with the blade and pinch the blade and have a kickback. Okay, so I think we covered pretty well everything I can think of off the top of my head as far as most of the basic safety, the functions of the saw, what all the different gadgets and knobs and that do on here. Keep your saw in good shape. You don't want to just toss it in the corner or drop it all the time, because what happens is over time the shoe or the base plate will get bent and the saw just doesn't sit right. It doesn't ride nicely on the material you're passing it over. So you just, you don't have to be, really super careful with it, but you just don't want to chuck it around or drop it off the roof or drop it from the ladder or whatever. Set it down and be relatively careful with it so you don't bend it if you want it to last. So that's got it. We're going to call that a wrap on circular saws. If you have any questions, you could post your question preferably in my forum. So go there, post any questions. If you have just a general comment, you like the video or whatever, post that down here in the comments. Click the thumbs up icon here on the video. If you liked what we had, that helps our ratings quite a bit. And as always, you can look for links in our descriptions. We try to post links sometimes for some of these tools in those descriptions, and helps you find them easier if you're interested in something we were demonstrating. Other than that, you can always follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, all that stuff. Okay? So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.